Welcome to Sphinx Talk. I'm your host, Brother Eric Christopher Webb, and we are here live at the 92nd Eastern Regional Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As my guest today, I have Eastern Regional Vice President, Brother Christopher Ellis. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you for having me, my brother.
Glad to have you on my show finally. We are in Philadelphia. Why Philly?
Why Philly? Truthfully, we don't have a ton of options anymore. The convention, as a good thing, has grown in such a way that some of the smaller cities across the eastern seaboard and in the region that we would normally use weren't able to host it. So in a certain respect, Philadelphia was a lifesaver because our original option in a different part of the region didn't have the capacity to take on the convention this year.
Right. Okay. So this year's convention, what's the theme?
The theme is everywhere we go, telling Alpha's story, which is centered on, from an operational perspective, getting best practice on external relations and communications, which has led to some of the events that you've seen us participate in. Now, I got a quick thing. Am I really the last one to get interviewed?
Yes, you are. No, you're not. Western region.
Okay.
Brother Kimball.
I was the tail on my line, so it's only fitting that I be last.
Let's go back to your Alpha journey. A lot of brothers don't know necessarily, may not know your journey. And we have a lot of viewers out there that are not members of the D9 or not members of Alpha Phi Alpha. Let's talk about your journey as a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. What inspired you to become a member?
Certainly. I think there are moments that many of us didn't realize were moments in the formative years. So first, I would say part of my journey had to be the exposure to Greek life in general, Black Greek letter organizations through my mother, who is a member of Delta Sigma Theta.
Okay.
So I remember seeing the letters, and they looked different and weird as a kid growing up. I remember meeting other members of her sorority and the noises and calls and stuff that I called them noises as a kid, but then I realized it was the call and it was their thing. So that was an introduction of sorts. When I went on my official basketball visit at Dartmouth College, I was hosted by an Alpha brother named Kenny Mitchell. Kenny is now out in the world doing great things. He's a master marketer, and I believe he's a chief marketing officer for Levi's, the Levi's Corporation.
Wow. Okay.
Out in on the West Coast. So I was hosted by Kenny. He was a point guard on the basketball team in his junior year. I stayed in the Theta Zeta, that's my chapter, house, which was a small apartment and known in the River Cluster at Dartmouth. And I stayed there. So I saw the letters for the first time on the wall in the chapter. Didn't know so much about it. At that point, it was, Michael Jordan was an Omega. Kobe Bryant was throwing up hooks when he was in high school. And I think you probably had Shaq that was throwing.
And what year was this?
This is 96, 95, 96 is that time frame. Very, high school. Chose Dartmouth as my college. Played basketball. Again, Kenny Mitchell's now a senior. Also had Keith Stanton, both Alpha brothers, the two black guys on a mostly white basketball team. I roomed with Kenny. We were roommates during the season on away games. And eventually, because of who they were, with Kenny being a major influence, I investigated Alpha and kept taking the next step. So in the fall of 1997, under the tutelage of Sharif Falari Desomu and Justin James Carter out of Chicago and New Orleans, respectively, I was the number 2 on the line with my line brother, who's also named Christopher Ahmad Surf. We became Exodus fall 97, number 2 to Grim Reaper.
Wow. So Dartmouth College, I think I always kind of throw that back at you because as a journalist, and I do recall when I was in college at Lincoln between 87 and 91, Dartmouth's newspaper would always get in hot water dealing with racial slurs, or I don't even know how to call it. They were just off the chain in the late 80s and whatnot. What was that atmosphere like for you as a member of Alpha Phi Alpha and obviously an aspiring leader on the campus? What was that like for you?
There are two newspapers at Dartmouth with Dartmouth in the name. There is the Dartmouth, which is, I believe, one of the nation's oldest college newspapers. And then there is the Dartmouth Review, which is the more controversial one that you're speaking of.
Yeah.
I think there were incidents the entire time I was there. Not necessarily related to the newspaper specifically, even though it had that reputation and that brand, right? But there were always issues that popped up. But I think there were issues that popped up throughout the entirety of the existence of my chapter. And you can hear the narrative from the 7 original charter members and what they fought about, to the brothers that were dealing with apartheid in South Africa, to brothers that came up and were dealing with other issues either on campus or in the world in general. So I think the big thing that stands out to me when I was on campus was when folks had what was called the ghetto party. And their advertisement was like, hey, make your belly big as a pregnant woman, wear your gang rags and bring your crack vials. And, there was a lot of controversy about that. And there was general outrage and specific outrage.
Right.
So, we participated in that and probably were the beneficiaries of the kumbaya on the other side of it, perhaps. But there was always something going on. I think on most college campuses, even if we look at what's happening today, you will see that the energy on a college campus lends itself towards attacking some of the most intense issues and young people really taking a stand in areas where they feel like change is needed. Everywhere we go, telling Alpha story, it's the play off of a popular chant that we have.
Right. That's what that automatically came to mind. So how does that play out in this convention? How are you amplifying that theme in this convention?
So I think there have been 3 major pieces that have happened so far. And, conventions are mostly about the internal workings of the fraternity. There are delegates voting and approving items that are internal to the fraternity in nature. Yesterday, we participated in a community service event out in Northwest Philly that was, attached to the Philadelphia Housing Authority. And we were building, a small pavilion structure. Our job was cleanup. We had extra hands, so we helped with cleanup. And the brothers that were in charge and organized that in connection with the Youth Build program.
Okay.
They got some, we got some media coverage from that yesterday on one of the local stations. And we'll share that with the brothers here in the coming hours during one of our sessions. But they ran a nice media spot on Alpha Phi Alpha coming to Philadelphia and contributing to the community. And also last night, we had the Philadelphia Secretary of Education here, along with other thought leaders in the education space doing the public program. And then today we had folks that were in media, public relations, and entrepreneurs delivering their message on how we can communicate. So what the combination of those things right now, we're hoping to give different aspects of communication. The first being in person, boots on ground, in the community, communicating direct and personally. 2, sitting in a colloquium and having experts speak on a topic broadly, communicating that way, and then actually talking about the strategy and the tactical aspects of the profession of communication.
Right.
Like, we had Philadelphia's own Benny Boom Douglas, who was here and talked about, he's a movie producer a music video producer and is speaking to people on a wide range and huge scale. What he said today, he's made products and content that has over 1 billion views.
Right.
That's a lot of influence and a lot of eyeballs communicating through visuals. They talked about that. So those are like the tactical, the practical, as well as the strategic, and then the boots on ground, the intense, like it's face to face like us right now. It's a different form of communication, right? But it's very necessary. So we tried to bring all of that to the convention.
How important is that in your overall administration?
Let's put it like this. It was important enough to theme an entire convention over.
Okay.
So, and it's not even theming an entire convention over. We theme an entire year in this lane.
Right.
You have, as a vice president, if you're lucky to serve 2 terms, you have 4 years.
Right.
So this is the third of 4 conventions for me. And then this one, we wanted to go down this direction. But if you remember from our conversation in early October, when we had our staff meeting, we were focused on communications, because I believe that there is a positive story to be told about our fraternity. There's a positive story for folks on the ground. There's a positive historical narrative of the fraternity. And I think that sometimes we need to package and share some of the things that we actually do in the community versus the things that folks may always or mostly be familiar with.
So what do you think the public's perception of Alpha's brand is?
I think it's multifaceted, for one. I think that depending on where you are, your opinion of the fraternity changes. So even though the fraternity spans across multiple generations, I think that the younger you are, probably the more ignorant you are of who we are in our brand, sans if you have a member of the fraternity in close proximity to you.
Okay.
So then that's our job to be in the community so that you can see us engaging and help to influence the brand, right? So that's one. I think for those that have gone to college, depending on if there's a chapter there or not, I think there is a different type of view, because many of the brothers were probably either your friends or peers or even perhaps adversaries. So your opinion is going to be more based on that college band and that college experience and those individuals that you dealt with. And then in a professional and what we love to call our graduate or grad or alumni world,
chapters, right?
I think it's about the visibility and that external presentation that the chapters can make on the ground. So one is in the house, one is on the campus, and one is in the community, right? I'm using those 3 levels,
right?
Because I think they all have very unique dispositions on how people engage and interact with the brand.
Okay, now what about internationally? Because the Eastern region does supervise or oversee, include some international chapters, correct?
Absolutely.
And so our general public doesn't know that. So what chapters, what not chapters, I should say, what states and countries are included under the Eastern region?
So the Eastern region in the continental United States runs along the eastern seaboard from Maine all the way through Virginia, including the states of Maine, New Hampshire, where I was made,
right.
Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island,
okay,
New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, District of Columbia, and Virginia. And then when you go across this pond, it's Bermuda, 2 chapters in London, both a college and alumni.
Right.
Germany, in Frankfurt, they have a alumni chapter based on military base, as well as on the continent of Africa. Starting at the bottom, we have South Africa, Ghana, and Liberia, which are almost, really close to each other geographically, or at least when we look at the humongous continent of Africa, closer than other points and places.
In Liberia, where we have our brother who has become the president of Liberia.
Absolutely. And let's not forget we have the Middle Eastern chapter, which I believe is centered around the UAE. So, I mean, it's quite a wide geographic expanse. Our folks over there talk about the different time zones and things of that nature, which could make it a challenge for brothers to fellowship to a certain extent. But I think over time we've become more sophisticated. We've had more tools to be able to connect, and you could feel the brotherhood. When we went to Liberia, you could definitely feel the influence and feel the brotherhood and the similarities of that brotherhood, even across major distance, a 20-hour travel to get there. You can still feel it, which is great.
So how's our brand perceived internationally in those areas, and do you think the chapters do a good job as far as highlighting and illustrating our brand?
I mean, I think similar to the States, you could run the full gamut of how the brand is perceived. I would say right now it's a challenge in a place like London,
right? Because
it's the concept of fraternities and organized fraternities with Greek letters. It's not the concept of organizing in organizations.
Right.
It's that particular type attached to a college is probably more of a uniquely American concept than it is in that culture. So I would say we have a challenge there. But I would think from being able to look at our population in the Germany chapter, they are stronger, and it's more of a close-knit community based off of the presence on the military base. The brothers in the African continents, there is a cultural transfer that's even able to happen, as a lot of, let's take Ghana. Okay. There are a lot of Ghanaians in the States between, New York and DC and, Boston and some of the other major metropolitan areas that have been initiated over time, and many of them have repatriated and gone home and are living there and have started the fellowship, which brought rise to be able to create a chapter recently. So there's a different vibe there. I could tell that in Liberia, the brothers that were Alpha brothers were the somebodies of that community and that culture. And I think the same thing exists in South Africa. So I think it really depends on where you are and what is the makeup of the Black community in that sort of geography.
So we represent affluence, usually affluence and influence in many of these countries.
Very possible, yes.
Okay. Now let's look at how that translates on a college campus in the United States. We've talked we've had conversations informally about, and I think everybody, a lot of the organizations now, all the fraternities are facing a challenge now. Fewer and fewer African American men are going to college, or if they are, they're choosing they're choosing other pathways in college where they're doing the 2 years and they're packaging it a different way, how they're going through school. And then when they're at school, oftentimes, instead of joining these fraternities, they're joining these other organizations. Is this kind of a scary thing that we're facing right now, that we're not attracting, not necessarily because we don't make an impact, but because of all these other options that are out there and all these other easier options, let's just say?
What was that? I think maybe it's chapter 7, 11 of self-examination. Yeah. I think we can cut the statistics multiple ways. The number of Black males entering college is much higher today than it was, say, in 1980, 1985, even 1990, in the era where you came.
Okay, I stand corrected then. Okay.
That's not saying that it's not decreasing.
Okay.
So there's a difference. I'm saying the line is going like a little hook, right? Mm-hmm. But it's still larger. What we are also saying is that the opportunities that many of the young men have had from their households that are entering college now is vastly different than the opportunities that possibly their parents and or their grandparents had when they went to college. There were less of them going to college. So those that were probably the best of the best of the best because everybody had poured everything in them for them to be able to get there.
Okay.
So think of how special the Cornell 7 must have been to be on an Ivy League campus in the year 1905, 1906. And when you read the prologue, everybody that was there before didn't come back.
Right.
Okay, so they were extremely special, but we're not holding ourselves to that level at that density currently. It's not even the same ball game. Cornell doesn't have just 7 or 8 black dudes there right now. They've got way more, along with black women, along with Latinos, and it's a bigger melting pot. It's a different culture than it was in 1905 and 1906.
Right.
So, that being said, yes, I think we have a challenge on college campuses, but I think it is a communication and intentionality sort of lane as opposed to the fraternity and the organization. Forget the word fraternity. The organizing of black and black male leaders, brothers of color into an entity is still as much relevant today as it was in the opening of the year 1905 and 06, right? Mm-hmm. I think we probably need to spend some time I won't even say restructuring ourselves. It's more of a refocus to say this is important to us that we spend some attention and some money, some time and some dollars, some time and some treasure in this space to build, to me, what I would consider the base of the corporate pyramid of Alpha Phi Alpha.
So, I mean, we've talked a lot about brand and image, and a question or theme that has been bouncing around on social media a lot, particularly in our affiliate or affinity groups on different social media platforms, has been around neophyte presentations, particularly for alumni chapters, and the look and presentation of that. One, these shows used to be, when we pledged and we had pledge processes, they were probate shows, and they were done during the process, well, as the process went on. And then now they're neophyte shows, and it had all the character of that, the militarization and that sort of thing. And we did that daily because we were pledging that way. Now that's not the case. We have a membership intake process, and now we have these shows that are happening afterward. And undergrad, a lot of folks are fine with it because it still kind of has the college feel and kind of celebrates that kind of culture and kind of gives a nod back to the past. But the alumni chapters now, wearing masks and combat vests and things of that nature, and you're a 55-year-old man in a combat vest. I mean, how does that kind of illustrate the brand of Alpha? Are we saying it out both sides of our face, or what's going on here?
I was talking to a brother about this a couple of days ago, and he said it's sort of like a child being like, you set up something for a kid, and it's their turn, their time to shine, and the parent comes and pushes them out the way and takes the picture. It's just like, come on. I think there's an opportunity to express the excitement and the celebration around the initiation of new members, both at the college and alumni level, across the fraternity. I believe that is a thing. I believe that we should be more focused on how we communicate that through the mediums that we want to use in a more intentional way, or at least a more strategic way. Everything looks the same.
Right.
Now, but I'm going to tell you this. Yeah. I used to be the guy that would stay up until 1 o'clock in the morning scrolling through YouTube, and it's probably not a little less Instagram. It was more YouTube. Instagram wasn't as popular yet. Looking at probate shows and all of that. I used to love watching, and then it all looked the same.
The same.
If I've seen one, I've seen them all at this point. And I really say, like, you can almost go back to, I think, around the 07, 08 time frame and see that was sort of the proliferation of this era of what the shows
they look
like.
Right.
I would even caution that it's a chapter here in the East, and maybe one in an HBCU here in the East and one in the HBCU in the South that kind of elevated the way in which the visual presentation was delivered.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a marker you'll understand: when you see somebody walk out with the dean pole,
it says
dean
the
and all
80,
that, come on, they didn't do that when you came.
They
definitely wasn't it, but they started to do that. That's one of those things that when you see it in the video, it's being replicated. I hope we can figure out what the next era is going to look like. I feel with all the phones and the cameras and stuff, we should be able to draw upon more of the talent that we have in our neophytes to take it beyond, grumbling and seeking the light and aping out or whatever. I mean, with all of those things, I think we can take the next step in the evolution with our presentations for neophytes.
I think what's interesting is that, as I recall, and I kind of threw it out there, I couldn't recall in the 80s, I mean, we had probate shows, but I couldn't recall alumni chapters doing probate shows. I could not, I threw it out there. I said, could somebody tell me in the 80s one alumni chapter that did a probate show? I didn't see that. I mean, they weren't happening. But now, and there's no quote unquote, there was pledge periods back then. And now there are no pledge periods back then, but now we're cosplaying with alumni chapters.
I definitely have picked up the phone and called and challenged a couple of district directors on neophyte presentations that just looked out of sorts, right?
Right.
And it was more of a brotherly conversation. There's nothing I can really do administratively, but there is that thing of, what message are we really sending, right? Like, what are you really trying to say? And I think the dopamine that hits the brain from that gratification of how many views you're gonna get on Instagram is sweet. And I mean, there's a lot of fantastic.
And this isn't just the alpha. This is across the board.
So think about this:
other Greeks.
Your college campus, and you're on the campus of Lincoln, and you have a landmark on your campus,
right?
That everybody that's been on your campus or that's a student or a past student, alumni, whatever, is familiar with that.
Right.
Imagine if I have a group of neos and their backdrop is the Empire State Building or Niagara Falls.
Right.
Or the White House or the Capitol.
Right.
Or some other like very big landmark. What if they did Boys Here in Philly in front of the Rocky statue? Right. You understand what I'm saying? Like, so there's a campus that's humongous that has this appeal that I think folks have tapped into that were like, yeah, I think we should do this. I think that there are more sophisticated, forward-facing ways in which we can do that. And I hope that that's something that I can work on with you and others as we try to shape our presentation to the outside world.
So, Brother Ellis, you're a very busy man. So, can you share with the public and our audience what you do for a living?
Sure. I think the first thing I need to be responsible for is as a husband and father. So what do I do? That has to be first.
Right.
in terms of career, I've been in Albany, New York now for a little over 20 years this year, and spent most of my time in the public sector, gone from the New York State Assembly to the New York State Office for Technology. I spent several years, almost a decade, at the State University of New York, to Central Administration Office, doing from workforce development, some online learning stuff, and strategic stuff. And then 2 years ago, I took a leap and went over to run the Albany office for Mayor Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City. And I'm essentially the lobbyist with a team of lobbyists in Albany, representing the interests of New York City before the state legislature and the other state bodies in Albany, New York.
How do you balance all that, brother?
Carefully, hopefully not stressfully. But I think that the thoughts that go into being successful in one lane can make you successful in another. It's really about your ability to take the steps to be able to reach a place where you make a decision.
Right.
And whether that's in your household or in a volunteer job or in the fraternity or actually in your career, you're trying to get to a place where you're making a very good decision. And you have to gather information, siphon that information, have conversations about that information, and then make your recommendation and or hard decision about that. So I think there's a lot of overlap. So it's more of a discipline of thinking than in managing time and expectations than it is anything else. But the work can almost be boiled down. Some of my best alpha work came from my first job in the New York State Assembly, where I was learning about the New York State tax code. And you start to learn about how businesses are taxed, banks, insurance companies, utilities, and you understand there was a lesson, a self-taught lesson in corporate structure. So you figure out you're not intimidated by the language and the way that the law is written and policy and very technical sort of stuff. It was practice, so it was really good. It helped me a lot in my alpha career.
Wow. So what is next for the region for you?
I think as a region and as a leader of the region, you have to take all of the components and the things that you try to do and stack them and make them blocks. I think the thing that really lies before us is the special convention in Chicago, where we will address some of our structural pieces. And we're getting ready to work on the foundation of the fraternity. So I want the Eastern region to have a voice and beyond just a tacit vote, pure victory, but a real voice in shaping how we believe the fraternity should structure itself and operate moving forward. But that's the big thing on mine until we get through that convention in July. And as you can see, we started to talk about it already today. We had a lively business session today about those components, and want to help get brothers comfortable with that going forward.
Well, great. Thank you so much for taking the time out, Brother Ellis, and joining me on Sphinx Talk. Definitely, brother. Always a pleasure.
All right.
Indeed. Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Sphinx Talk with Brother Eric Christopher Webb. 06.
Sphinx Talk with Brother Eric Christopher Webb is sponsored by Good Health Wins. For more content, subscribe now.